Hi everybody, George Souris, Empire Legal. Today's topic, can Empire Legal represent a buyer and a seller? Great question, let's unpack it. Lawyers in Queensland are governed by the Australian Solicitor Conduct Rules, which came out in 2012. These rules give us the rules on what we can and can't do in Queensland law. In particular, conflict of interest is always a topic that we have to put at the front when making a decision to represent a client. Now, without jumping into all the legal jargon, 11.3 of these rules states that apart from acting in the best interests, we may, if we have consent from the client in writing and that they understand that we're acting for multiple parties, i.e. representing the buyer and the seller, then technically we are allowed to represent both parties. However, when we look at the conveyancing space, there is always an extremely high risk of opposing or competing interests, i.e. a seller wanting something or a buyer wanting something, and there's always that push-pull of finding the middle ground. Now, when you're representing one party, it's very simple. You don't have to be concerned of any conflict, but when you're representing both, it's a totally different story. How does that work in practice? In the event that a law firm chooses to act for both parties, there are set guidelines that must be adhered to through what we call an information barrier. In order to be compliant, these barriers require things like a compliance officer to oversee compliance, documentation not being able to be seen by the other party. So for example, lawyer A in office A of Empire Legal, say our Manly office, is representing the seller, and lawyer B in office B, say our Spring Hill office, is representing the buyer. There has to be a way that there is effectively a barrier up where you cannot see the other person's file or information in order to ensure there's no conflict. Sounds pretty complicated, right? The Law Society has given us guidelines on what we must do in order to not be in breach of our obligations under the Australian Solicitor rules. Another thing to note here, the Law Society doesn't condone or encourage law firms to convey both sides of a property transaction. So what's Empire's position? It's difficult for any person to be truly independent and act in the best interests of an individual when they represent both sides. There is an obvious conflict of interest that will occur if there's any dispute or issue that pops up in a conveyance when you're acting for both parties. No matter what the topic is, the client, be it the buyer or the seller, is going to take the position and assume that that lawyer is coercing with the other side if you're acting for both. There's just no way it can be avoided. It's a no-win situation for the solicitor. And that's because if in the event that there's a conflict, what has to happen is the law firm has to let both parties know, the sellers and the buyers, that there's been a conflict, and moreover, then cease to act for both sides. So you have to do the work, give away both clients in the end, and then those clients have to go and engage another law firm and pay them. Doesn't make sense, right? It ends up costing the clients more time and money. It's Empire Legal's view that it is not only unethical, but also unprofessional to act for both sides. So I would caution you, if you do get into a position where a solicitor says that they can represent both sides, are they truly acting in your best interests? We only ever represent one party, so we can always put our best foot forward and put our hand on our heart and say we are doing the absolute best job for that client. Would you want to be represented by somebody that was also helping the other guys? I wouldn't. Anyway, guys, that's our position. I just wanted to give you a bit more of an understanding on whether a law firm technically can engage in representing both sides, which obviously they can, but whether they should. I'll leave that up to you guys. Just wanted to clear that one up. All Australian solicitors' rules can be seen online on the Law Society's website. You can just Google it if you're curious about knowing our obligations and what we can and can't do. Thanks, guys. See you on the next one.